Hello Patreons. Today I'm going to go through how to draw a dog nose using coloured pencils. For this one I'm doing a portrait of a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel and I'm just up to the snout at the moment, so I'll go through how I created the effect of the nose in this tutorial. So around the snout the hairs are very fine and short, so I'm using very short strokes with my pencil, and I'm just using warm grey 1 at the moment just to start getting those lines in. It's a very faint grey, so it doesn't leave a very dark mark at this point. This particular dog has a white snout, so I don't want too much colour on the fur around the snout. I am paying attention to the reference photo, as the fur on the snout can go in quite a few different directions, so just make sure that you are going in the right direction. And here I've switched over to warm grey 3 and just adding a little bit more darker lines. With fur I'm not too worried about doing every individual stroke fur. I'm just trying to get the effect of the fur, so I'm focusing more on shadows and clumps of fur. And as you can see, I'm just doing little strokes which give the effect of fur without worrying about every strand of fur as such. On the left side of the portrait, it is in shadow, so I'm just adding a bit of the grey as just blocking in that shadowed area and the darker areas on the snout, just to get that colour down. You can still see the strokes I did before, but that light layer of grey helps to block in that colour. Now this particular dog had a little brown spot on the side of its nose, so I'm just adding that in with sanguine. And then going over it with Caput Mortem. And these two colours worked really well in this portrait for the brown colour on this dog. And turning it down with a little bit of the grey, the warm grey 1. Now just using black to sharpen the fur on that edge, just so that you can actually see where the fur is, because it's white fur against black fur. You've got to be careful at those sorts of edges where it's a dark fur against the white fur, that you don't do too much and cover up too much of the white fur. That's especially important when you're blending it, so you don't want to blend the black too much over the white fur. Here I am now blending with the odorless solvent. See how I'm trying to go in between the strands of bits of the white fur? I have smeared it a little bit over the white fur by accident there, but not too much. It won't make a big impact, but you do have to be careful not to do that too much. And then just blending in the rest of the snout. At this point I think I'm using a bit more solvent on the brush than I usually do, just because it is a thin layer of pencil. Sometimes when you don't have many layers you need to use a bit more solvent to get it to move the pigment around. I am still making sure that there's not excess on the brush, because you don't want so much that it makes the paper saturated, otherwise you'll have to wait ages for it to dry in between. And now going over with the white luminance pencil. I did test the Polychromos, but it wasn't opaque enough for this area, so now I'm going over with the white luminance pencil and just adding in little strokes to add some fur in there. As you can see, it doesn't work as well when there's not the dark colour underneath, but with this one it does actually show the texture in it quite well when you're looking at the portrait. It's just a very subtle texture over the lighter greys. And then adding in some finer hairs along that black edge. And just got to make sure that the pencil's nice and sharp to get those fine furs in. Coming back with the pencil a bit sharper now. And I keep rotating the pencil because that helps to keep the tip sharp. If you don't rotate it, then it bluntens a lot quicker, and then you're always having to sharpen the pencil. A lot of the time I find that I'm rotating the pencil without even thinking about it. Yeah, I just do it without even realizing that that's what I'm doing. It becomes an instinct, a natural thing to do. Added some of those fur lines over that brown patch too to make the white going over the brown, which this dog had a lot of fur which had brown, black and white fur all mixed in together, so it was quite an interesting fur pattern to draw. Now using warm grey 3 to just add in those darker fur shadows. This dog had a dark area around the actual nose part in the fur, and a lot of dogs have that, where it's just this slight darkening of the fur around the actual nose. Now onto the nose itself, and I'm just blocking in the shapes of the nose with the black pencil. I'm using a light to medium pressure, so not as light as my usual, but in these darker areas I do tend to press a bit harder with the black pencil just to get that coverage of pigment on that area. Now with the nose, make sure that you pay attention to where the those dark shadows are on the nose. They have a bit of an odd shape, the way that they've got the circular nostril part, but then they've got the little bit that overhangs on the side of the nostril, and it sort of does that curve. Pay attention to how that goes, because you do want to get that correct for the nose. If you get it off, it's going to change the way the nose looks, so make sure you get that shape right. Now just change to the cold grey 3 and just blocking in the whole area on the nose, and that's the colour I chose for the main colour of the highlights on the nose. So I'm just putting down a light layer of that and going over it a bit to make sure that there's a nice layer of pigment on the paper. And now I'm using cold grey 5 just to add in the shadows on the nose. I'm making sure that my pencil strokes are quite even and smooth. I don't want lines to show after I've blended it. So I'm not trying to get the furry look, I'm trying to get a smooth look. So I'm making sure that the pencil has quite an even pressure and a smooth application. I'm doing a mixture of circles with the pencil and lines. I am paying close attention to the reference photo to make sure I'm putting the shadows in the right spot. Now I'm using black to start adding some of the texture to the nose. I am doing small tight circles to get the texture. I am doing medium pressure, maybe a bit lighter than medium, just to get that texture look. I'll have to do several layers to get this texture, because after I blend it, it'll fade a bit, so I have to go over it again. But just doing little circles, not too worried about where they are or getting them correct as to the reference photo. Just making sure that the size of the circles are correct. So the ones at this side of the nose are a lot smaller than the other side of the nose because it's slightly further back because the way the dog's turning its head. And just make sure that the pencil is nice and sharp for this because you want the strokes to show. You're not trying to get a nice even coverage for this part. You just want, you do want the circles to show. And darkening up some of those shadows as well. I'm using a medium pressure there on those darker spots. Now onto blending. I start with the nostrils. I always like to do some of those, the darker areas first, and then blend it out. But you do have to be careful when blending because if you are doing a dark area next to a light area, you've got to watch out for the pigment that's left on your brush. So if you've blended a dark area, don't put the brush then straight onto a lighter area. Wash it. They clean it with the odorless solvent because that's a brush cleaner. So you can just swish it around in the odorless solvent and it'll clear the pigment out of the brush. And then you can use the solvent and the brush on a lighter area without worrying about the pigment sort of messing it up. And just using the black pencil to further darken those nostrils. Our dogs have very dark nostrils and they're very distinct. As you can see with the blending, a lot of that texture I did before faded, so I'll need to go over that again. And just making sure all those shadows are in and watching the reference photo to make sure that I've still got them in the right spot because some of those were faded, especially that one under that particular nostril. You couldn't quite see it after I'd blended it. In this area, I'm just doing light layers again. So you don't want to press too hard. You can always add more light layers, but if you start pressing too hard, then you will have issues doing multiple layers because the tooth of the paper will be flattened. Now I'm onto Cold Grey 5 again and just adding more shadows in, just darkening those areas up. And that was just a light layer. Now back to black and back to doing the circles again. I wasn't worried about getting the circles in the same spot as the previous layers. I just went over the whole lot with little tight circles. So you'll notice that the circles actually do have a gap in the middle. So I'm not colouring in each of the circles. I'm just doing a circle and leaving the centre uncoloured. Now just blending that out. You do have to be a bit more careful with how much solvent you put on the brush at this point, because as you can see, just the normal amount of solvent, it is moving that pigment around quite a lot more, because you've got all those extra layers on the paper now. You have to be more careful to blot the solvent off of the paintbrush, or to wipe it more, the excess off on the bottle or on paper. In order to get that texture on the nose to look even better, I've just taken the white Polychromos pencil, and I am just adding little dots into the centers of those circles, not all over, just in some spots, just to make those circles a bit more distinct than what they were. I am paying attention to the reference photo just to see where it needs those little highlights on. You see, I added a little highlight onto that bottom edge of that nostril, just to make it a bit more distinct from the shadow underneath it. And for this, I really am just doing little dots, not worried too much about it, just making sure that they're more in the center of those circles. But if they're not quite right, it's not that important. Making sure the little highlight in that area is a bit more obvious. Using the black again just to make some of those lines a bit darker. Now with the Luminance white pencil this time, I'm going to make just a few of those dots a lot brighter, because the Luminance white stands out a lot more than the other white, than the Polychromos one. So just using the Luminance white. So just pull out a few of those dots. Now, if you did want any of those white dots to really stand out, they needed to have had the white pencil used on them prior to doing any of the drawing or colouring of the nose. So from the very start, you would have needed to have put the white down if you wanted any of those dots to be really white. The other option is to use a gel pen to make them look really bright. But I thought that they were bright enough, so I wasn't too worried about them needing to have been brighter. Sometimes if a dog has a really shiny nose, then you'll need to have the white protected by the white pencil prior to starting. And now I'm just using Cold Grey 5 to add in the fur around the nose. Now that the nose is in place, it's easier to judge where the dark fur around the nose goes, whereas before I didn't quite know where the edge of the nose was going to be, so I had to wait until the nose was in place to finish the fur there. With the fur around the nose, always make sure to check the reference photo to see what direction it's going. It does tend to go out from the nose, but just check, especially around the mouth, it can go in all sorts of directions. So watch the reference photo to make sure that you're getting it right. You don't have to stress about getting the fur in all exactly right. It just has to be close. As I get closer to the mouth, some of the fur strokes will get a little bit longer, because the fur around the mouth is a longer length than what it is around the nose. And just make sure to keep rotating your pencil to keep it sharp when you're working on fur. Very easy to forget to rotate it, and then the lead will end up more blunt, and then you'll get thicker lines. You want the thin lines of a sharp pencil. I'm just blocking in some of that colour a bit on that side of the nostril. Here I am using red violet, and I love this colour. It's such a beautiful colour. And this particular dog had a lot of red colouring around the edge of its nose and on its mouth. And I didn't do as much as what was in the photo, but I did add a little bit in around the mouth and that section between the nose and the mouth. And then adding some black shadows in as well. With fur, it's just a matter of building up the layers. You just keep adding layer after layer, and you don't worry about it not looking right when you first do the first layers. You just keep building them because they will look better later. Now with the white Polychromos pencil, I'm just adding in some of the white fur. Just doing, again, just short strokes and just getting some of those strokes in. You will find with the white, sometimes you can't actually see what you're doing with it because obviously you're working on white paper, but it's important to get some of those white fur lines down early on to make sure that that fur will stay white after you've blended it. And that's blending it out and using it a bit of the solvent on the brush because it is the first layer. I usually use a bit more on the first go at blending than I do on the later layers. Now using the white luminance pencil to get in some of those whiskers. And just watching where they are on the reference photo to make sure that they're in roughly the right area and the right direction. It's not super important, but you don't want them going every which way, and you don't want to put too many in either. And sharpen my pencil again, make sure that it's got a nice tip. And the lines that you could see there, the white ones, were I'd used the white pencil on them prior to colouring in that back ear area, just to protect those whiskers from the black when I'd blended. with Cold Grey 5 and adding some more of that fur in. Just short strokes again, and just keeping my layers light. And slightly longer strokes down around the mouth, then up higher, closer to the nose. And watch where the reference photo shows that the fur is going. It definitely sort of changes around this area. It changes direction. Blocking in the shadows on that side of the face with Cold Grey too. That whole side of from the nose across is quite shadowed on this dog because of the way the face is turned. That side's darker, and so making sure that it's got enough shadow so that the other cheek looks light enough, which is the other side of the face is got the light catching it, so it's a lot brighter. Blending it out, and as this is the first layer of blending, I'm using quite a lot of the solvent on the brush. Not enough to soak the paper, but just enough to blend it smoothly. Adding in some more of the fur with the Cold Grey 5. Now this colour is sanguine, and just adding in a little bit around the mouth and that little bottom part of the nose. Not very much, I just want the slight hint of this colour. If you add too much of the red violet and the sanguine in this area, it will end up making the fur look dirty, and you don't want that. This particular dog has a bit of colouring around its mouth, so I wanted to get some of it, but you do have to be careful not to add too much. And this colour is red violet, and just adding in a little bit more of that fur with those colours, just getting that slight reddish tinge to that fur around the mouth. Again, using Cold Grey 3 just to add a little bit more of the fur in. Now sketching in where the shadows are underneath the mouth in the chin area. Pay attention to the reference photo. It's not just a simple rounded circular shape for a chin. They often do have little shadowy areas, especially if they've got little folds of skin under there. Some dogs will have a more simple chin, but this particular dog had little shadowed folds of skin under the chin, which made the fur have these shadowed areas. That wasn't just quite a simple rounded area. Now using cold grey 5. Making sure that one was nice and sharp to get the little fur strokes. And adding in the darker shadows into those areas where it needs it. Darkening those shadows with black now. I always do tend to work light to dark. Sometimes I need to get the darker areas locked in so I don't lose where they are, but I do tend to go through the lighter layers and then add black in later on, as you can always make something darker, but it's very hard with colored pencils to make it lighter. So if you start light and then get darker as you go, then it works a lot better. It's easier to fix the mistakes. And just blending that one out. For this piece, I used a size 4 filbert brush, just that long filbert brush. It works quite well with the paint thinner for this. I switched between a size 0, a size 4, and a size 8 filbert brushes, depending on what sort of size area I want to blend. If it's a really small area and I need to be very careful where I'm blending, then I'll use the size 0. For most things, I use the size 4, like the brush that I'm using at the moment. And then for large areas, mostly background type areas, I will use the size 8. The size 8 holds a lot of solvent in it though, so I do have to be careful not to drench the paper with that one. Coming back over the area with the white luminance pencil, just adding in some of those white furs in. The white luminance pencil works so well for this sort of work, just adding those white fur marks on top of all the other colours. I usually use mostly Polychromos pencils, but I do have a few of the luminance pencils, and the white one is definitely one I use a lot of. I've gone through quite a few of those pencils so far, and I love it. It works so well. I do hope to build up my luminance collection though, because they have some fantastic colours and some awesome tans and browns, which just go so well for portrait. And here I'm using cold grey 1 to start getting the fur in on this side of the cheek. This area is quite light because the light source is hitting this side of the face directly, which means that I'm not actually going to be doing that many fur strokes in this area. I'm not going to be darkening it up heaps, as I want to make sure that it still has that white look of the light striking it. Because it is white fur, it's quite easy to overdo it and then it ends up being too dark. I'm just darkening up a few of those with the cold grey 3. I'm just paying attention to the reference photo. And then back to cold grey 1. Cold grey 1 is really good to use in areas of where it is white fur, because it only has a slight colour. It doesn't have, it's not very dark, and it's a good way to build up texture without actually putting much colour onto the paper. You do want to make sure that the pencil tip is sharp though, because you aren't going to be doing multiple layers in this area. You need to have the pencil tip sharp so that those the strokes you do look really nice. I'm just using cold grey 3 to add in some of the fur around the bottom edge of the cheek. Slightly longer fur than further up. Now cold grey 5, adding in some of those darker spots. Just a little bit, not too much around the cheek. And a little bit more sanguine around that edge of the mouth. As you'll see, most of my strokes are actually slightly curved. I don't really put much thought into it, but I'm not doing straight lines when I'm doing the first strokes. I always make sure that they're just slightly curved when I draw. If you do straight lines, then the fur won't look natural or realistic. Fur always tends to be a little bit curved. So that's why I always keep my strokes as slight curves. Just adding some more layers with the light grey. I actually find this area the hardest to do because it is a light area. You don't want to put too much colour down, and it's hard to get the effect of the fur without making it go too dark. I always find the areas where it's light and white fur is the most challenging. How to blend that out, and I'm not blending out the whole area. I'm being quite careful not to blend everywhere. You just want to blend out those edgy bits that I was working on. And this dog had a slight pink mark on that area of the cheek, and I just added it a little bit in with the sanguine. Didn't want to do too much, just a little bit. It was one of those marks where I could have actually left it out. It could have made it look bad. It could have made it look dirty, but it was alright in this one. But it's one of those marks where you have to actually wonder if you should put it in or not. I'm just using the white luminance pencil to tone it down by putting strokes over it. I found that when I add the colour, it came up a bit too bright for my liking. So just using the white over the top of it helped to tone it down a bit. Just using a little bit of the black to darken some of the shadows around the mouth. And that's it for this tutorial, and that's how I created this portrait. You'll notice that when I scan things in, sometimes the picture comes out a lot brighter than what it is when I'm drawing, and that's the light from the scanner actually reflecting off that area. So I find that the white cheek scans not quite as well as the rest of the picture, and that unfortunately is just how it happens with the scanner. So in the scanned copy, I find that it actually loses some of the detail of areas which are white or light coloured. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye for now.